It started like any other morning on daytime television, the bright lights of The View, shining down on a panel of women who have spent decades mastering the art of controlled chaos. But nothing could have prepared the studio audience or millions watching at home for the firestorm about to erupt. Julia Roberts, Hollywood royalty, America's sweetheart, the woman who once lit up screens with a dazzling smile, walked straight into a battlefield she did not expect. Sitting across from Joy Behar, the sharp-tongued queen of controversy. It was supposed to be a light-hearted interview promoting Julia's latest film. Instead, it turned into the kind of on-air spectacle producers secretly crave but networks fear. From the moment Julia took her seat, the tension was electric, a silent countdown ticking toward catastrophe. Joy opened with her signature grin, but the smile carried a sting. "Julia, you've made a career of playing strong women. But let's be real, aren't you a little out of touch with the world today?" The audience gasped. Julia blinked, stunned, out of touch. The words hung in the air like a slap. She leaned forward, her voice smooth but cutting. "Joy, I didn't realize we were here to discuss my personal relevance. I thought we were talking about my work." The studio crowd buzzed, some laughing nervously, others whispering in disbelief. The temperature in the room rose instantly, the kind of heat you feel when two storms collide. Joy wasn't backing down. She pressed harder, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, we are talking about your work, but let's face it, Hollywood doesn't roll out the red carpet for actresses over 50 the way it used to. Don't you think audiences have moved on?" Julia's jaw tightened. Her eyes flashed with something raw, something rarely seen on television, rage carefully packaged behind grace. She shot back, "If audiences had moved on, I wouldn't still be here." "Maybe the problem isn't the audience, Joy. Maybe the problem is people like you who can't stand to see women thrive past their so-called expiration date." The crowd erupted cheers, gasps, shouts colliding in a frenzy of live TV chaos. Joy leaned back in her chair, pretending to laugh, but her voice cracked with irritation. "Oh please, don't play the victim card here. You're rich, you're famous, you're adored. Cry me a river." Julia's face hardened, and in that moment, the line between celebrity interview and public showdown disappeared. It was no longer about promoting a movie, it was about survival, pride, and power in front of millions. And then, just as the audience leaned forward in breathless silence, Julia said the words that would send shockwaves across the entertainment world. "You want drama? Joy, you've got it." The moment those words left Julia Roberts' lips, the studio audience shifted in their seats like they were witnessing a courtroom verdict. "You want drama? Joy, you've got it." The phrase rang through the air like a warning bell, sharp enough to slice through the layers of studio laughter and forced politeness that usually shield daytime television. Julia leaned forward, hands clasped together on the table, her knuckles whitening. Across from her, Joy Behar smirked, the kind of smirk that said, "I've been here before, and I know exactly how to win." But this wasn't just another sparring match for Joy. This was Julia Roberts, a woman who had weathered Hollywood's darkest storms and still managed to come out smiling. And Julia wasn't smiling now. "Drama," Joy quipped, raising an eyebrow. "Darling, this is The View. We practically trademarked it." The audience roared with laughter, but the laughter wasn't unanimous. Half of the crowd leaned toward Julia, captivated, almost protective, waiting to see what she would unleash. Julia tilted her head, her voice dropping low, slow, deliberate. "No, Joy, this isn't The View. This is your view, and maybe that's the problem." Gasps shot through the audience like sparks. Co-hosts exchanged nervous glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, others wide-eyed with glee. Cameras zoomed in tighter, catching every twitch, every glare, every bead of sweat. Joy clapped her hands together sarcastically, feigning delight. "Oh, isn't this rich? Julia Roberts lecturing me about perspective. Tell me, Julia, do you even watch this show? Or are you too busy in your Malibu mansion pretending the world still revolves around you?" The studio audience exploded, laughing, half booing. One woman in the front row actually shouted, "Leave her alone." Security twitched at the edges of the set, prepared for anything. Julia's face flushed crimson, but instead of shrinking, she grew taller in her chair, her voice shaking the walls. "You think you can reduce me to some washed-up star clinging to fame? Let me remind you, Joe, I didn't build my career on tearing other women down." The words landed like daggers. Even the other hosts were stunned into silence. Sunny jaw dropped. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, muttering under her breath, "Lord have mercy." Joy's smirk faltered, replaced with something colder, something angrier. She jabbed her finger across the table, her voice sharp as glass. "Don't you dare preach to me about tearing women down, Julia. I've spent 20 years giving women a platform, while you've spent 20 years cashing Hollywood paychecks." The insult struck deep, and the room went nuclear. The audience was no longer just watching a talk show. They were witnesses to a battle royal, where reputations, pride, and legacies were on the line. Julia leaned back, eyes burning, and whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch, then maybe it's time someone took your platform away. The studio fell into stunned silence, broken only by the low hum of cameras zooming in for the kill. Julia Roberts' words, then maybe it's time someone took your platform away, were like a thunderclap, the kind that shakes windows and rattles bones. Joy Behar froze for half a beat, her painted smile cracking into something raw and unfiltered. The crowd collectively gasped, some clapping in awe, others booing like it was a gladiator fight. For once, Joy seemed caught off guard, and in that split second, Julia had seized the upper hand. Her calm exterior was gone, replaced with a ferocity no one had ever seen from America's sweetheart. She wasn't here to promote a film anymore. She was here to demolish. Joy leaned forward, her voice trembling with restrained fury. You think you can waltz in here, Julia, and tell me how to run my show? I've been doing this since before you learned how to fake a smile for the cameras. Julia fired back instantly, her tone dripping with venomous grace. And yet here we are, Joy, you, clinging to controversy like a life raft, and headlining movies, still on magazine covers, still relevant without needing to pick fights with my guests. The audience erupted, the studio practically vibrating with the sound of cheers and jeers. It was no longer an interview, it was a prize fight. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the reluctant referee, threw up her hands. Ladies, this is supposed to be daytime TV, not WrestleMania. But neither Julia nor Joy was listening. They were locked in, two titans circling, waiting to strike again. Joy's voice rose an octave, breaking through the chaos. You think you're untouchable, Julia, you're a relic. You're Hollywood's nostalgia act, and you should be thanking me for even keeping your name alive in front of millions. The jab cut deep, the word relic hanging in the air like poison. Julia's eyes widened, then narrowed into a glare that could scorch the walls. She stood up slightly from her chair, her voice echoing across the set. You can try to bury me under your insults, Joy, but remember this, people come to see Julia Roberts. Nobody's tuning in for Joy Behar. The crowd exploded, half rising from their seats in shock. The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, sensing the dangerous edge this battle was teetering on. Producers in the control room shouted through headsets, debating whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos ride. But the cameras stayed rolling. This was television gold. Joy slammed her hand on the table, her face twisted with rage. Get over yourself, Julia. This isn't your movie set. You don't get to control the script here. Julia, unflinching, leaned across the table and whispered with lethal clarity, No, Joy, but I can rewrite the ending. Julia's whisper sliced through the noise, like a razor, but I can rewrite the ending. The phrase landed with a chilling finality, and suddenly, the studio wasn't a talk show anymore, it was a battlefield where only one woman could walk away victorious. The audience held its breath, torn between awe and discomfort. Joy Behar's face hardened, her knuckles pressing white against the edge of the desk, as if she were holding herself back from lunging across the table. For a woman who had thrived on sparring matches for decades, this wasn't just banter anymore. It was personal, vicious, and on the edge of spiraling out of control. Rewrite the ending. Joy spat, her voice rising in a near shriek. Julia, this isn't one of your fairy tale rom-coms where everything magically works out because you smile pretty. This is real life. And in real life, women like you, she paused, glaring, get eaten alive the moment they show weakness. The audience gasped. It wasn't just a jab. It was a challenge, a dare for Julia to collapse under the pressure. But Julia Roberts, defiant as ever, leaned back in her chair and flashed a smile, at the charming Hollywood smile that won her Oscars. But a venomous grin, sharp enough to draw blood. You call this real life, she hissed. Real life is fighting tooth and nail to keep your dignity while people like you profit from tearing it apart. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. The sound was deafening, punctuating the moment like a gunshot. The audience erupted into chaos, half cheering, half screaming. Whoopi Goldberg groaned, throwing her hands in the air. Oh Lord, somebody roll the credits. But the cameras stayed glued to the showdown. This was history in the making. Joy rose to her feet as well, matching Julia's height. The two women now inches apart, faces glowing under the hot studio lights. The tension was so thick it could be bottled. Dignity. Joy sneered. You think you're the poster child for dignity? You're a pampered movie star who hasn't had to worry about paying a bill in 30 years. Don't lecture me about struggle. Julia's eyes flashed with fury, her voice cracking with emotion as she shot back. And you're a bitter host who confuses cruelty with honesty. Maybe that's why people are tuning out more and more every year. The audience gasped so loudly it echoed through the rafters. Even the production crew couldn't hide their reactions, hands covering mouths, jaws dropping. This wasn't supposed to happen. Guests didn't stand up, they didn't challenge Joy, and they certainly didn't threaten her authority on live TV. Yet Julia Roberts had done all of that in less than 10 minutes. Joy leaned closer, practically nose to nose, her voice trembling with rage. You think you can humiliate me on my show? Try it, Julia, I dare you. The dare hung in the air like a live wire, electrifying the studio. Try it, Julia, I dare you. It wasn't just a provocation, it was a gauntlet thrown down in front of millions of viewers. Julia Roberts' chest rose and fell, her breath sharp, her eyes unblinking. The audience went silent again, waiting for the next move like spectators at a heavyweight boxing match. And then Julia did something no one expected. She leaned back, smiled faintly, and said in a voice dripping with icy calm, "You don't need me to humiliate you, Joy. You're doing a fine job of that yourself." The crowd erupted cheers, screams, even a few gasps of disbelief. Joy Behar's face turned crimson, the insult burning through her composure. Like acid, her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk, and her co-hosts leaned as far back as possible, desperate to avoid being caught in the crossfire. "You smug," Joy began, but Julia cut her off with a raised hand, a gesture that silenced the room. "Let me tell you something, Joy," Julia continued, her voice louder, now, carrying the authority of someone who had commanded movie screens for decades. "For years, you've made a career out of mocking people, baiting them, tearing them apart just to get a reaction. But today, you picked the wrong person. I've fought harder battles than you could ever imagine, and I'm not about to let you turn me into one of your punchlines." The audience exploded again, stomping their feet, clapping wildly, their energy feeding Julia's fury. Joy, however, wasn't about to fold. She jabbed her finger toward Julia, her voice shaking with rage. "Oh, please, you're nothing more than Hollywood PR in high heels. The only reason anyone still cares about you is because you're a nostalgia act, Julia. The world has moved on, you're living in the past." Julia's jaw tightened. She stepped out from behind the desk, standing fully now, her presence towering. The cameras followed her every move, zooming in as if documenting a battle of titans. She pointed directly back at Joy, her voice cracking like thunder. The past is what built me. The past is why millions still cheer my name. And maybe you should remember, Joy, that your career wouldn't last a week in the world I've survived in." The audience erupted yet again, chants of Julia, Julia, breaking out in the back rows. Joy's face twisted in fury, her composure shattered. She slammed her palm on the desk so hard the microphones rattled, her voice shrieking over the chaos. "Get out. If you don't like it here, then get the hell out of my show. Get out. If you don't like it here, then get the hell out of my show." Joy's words thundered across the set like a final verdict, and the studio audience gasped so loud it nearly drowned out the sound of the desk still vibrating from her slam. The tension was no longer simmering, it had boiled over, spilling into something raw, something dangerous. Julia Roberts didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, her chin tilting upward with the regal defiance of someone who had spent a lifetime under the unforgiving spotlight of Hollywood. She didn't just look calm, she looked untouchable. The co-host sat, frozen. Sunny Hostin glanced nervously toward the producers. Sarah N. shifted uncomfortably in her seat, biting her lip. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back, muttering under her breath, "This train's gone off the rails." The control room buzzed in panic. Should they cut to commercial? Should they censor? Or should they ride the storm and let the chaos unfold, knowing it was the kind of viral moment that daytime television rarely ever dreamed of? Julia placed her hands firmly on the desk, leaning across toward Joy, her voice steady, commanding. "You don't get to throw me out, Joy. You don't have that power over me. Not here, not anywhere." The audience roared, some cheering wildly, others booing with equal passion. The studio had become an arena, sides chosen, voices raised, energy crackling like lightning between the two women. Julia paused just long enough for the noise to settle before driving in the dagger. "But you know what's worse than being thrown out of your show? Watching the world realize you've become irrelevant on it." The crowd erupted into chaos, some standing to applaud, others gasping so hard it sounded like a wave crashing. Joy's mouth fell open, her entire body trembling with rage. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Julia. "Irrelevant. I've been here for 25 years, Julia. 25 years of headlines, debates, and making this show what it is. You think you can walk in and..." But Julia cut her off, her voice slicing through the noise. "Exactly, Joy, 25 years. And maybe it's time you asked yourself why after all that time, you still need to scream just to be heard." The line hit like a cannon blast. Audience members clutched their chests, mouths wide open, as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Joy's face contorted in fury, but her words tangled in her throat, choked off by the sheer weight of Julia's blow. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Julia pushing back her chair with a sharp scrape. She stood tall, her eyes locked on Joy like a final stare down before the kill. The air in the studio felt heavy, electric, the kind of moment that etched itself instantly into television history. And then Julia took a step toward the edge of the stage. Julia's heels clicked against the studio floor as she took that first step toward the stage edge, the sound echoing like a countdown to detonation. The audience craned their necks, desperate to see what she would do next. Was she walking off? Was she about to deliver one last verbal strike before exiting in flames? Joy Behar, red-faced and trembling, leaned forward across the desk. Her voice cracking as she shouted after her. "Yeah, walk away, Julia. That's what cowards do, run when they can't handle the heat." The insult hit the air like gasoline on a fire, and the crowd went berserk. Some booed, others screamed no, while a small cluster erupted into chants of Julia, Julia. The set was vibrating with energy, the co-hosts sinking into their chairs as if praying for the moment to end. Whoopi Goldberg, clearly done, muttered into her microphone, "Producers, cut to commercial before somebody drops dead on this set." But the producers didn't cut. The cameras were locked on Julia Roberts, knowing this moment would dominate headlines for weeks. Julia stopped, mid-stride, slowly turning back toward Joy with a look so piercing it froze the studio. Her voice, calm, yet dripping with venom, carried across the room. "Coward, you think walking away from your circus is cowardice? No, Joy, cowardice is hiding behind insults because you're terrified of being forgotten." The line detonated like a bomb. The audience shrieked, clapped, stomped their feet in hysteria. It was a roar so loud that even Joy had to pause, her mouth twitching, her breath ragged, fury radiating off her like heat from a furnace. Julia's eyes never left her target. She marched back toward the desk with unshakable poise, each step deliberate, her voice climbing higher. "Do you know why people still talk about me after 30 years? Because I earned it. Because I worked for it. Because audiences, real people, believe in me. You've built a career tearing people down. And when the dust settles, Joy, there will be nothing left but the echo of your own bitterness." The audience erupted again, half the room on their feet, clapping and screaming like they were witnessing a title fight. Joy slammed her fist against the desk, shaking so badly her water glass tipped over and spilled across the table. "You self-righteous diva," she roared. "You think this show needs you? You're a guest, just a guest, and guests can be shown the door." Julia leaned in close, her voice low, dangerous, the microphones straining to catch it. "Then maybe the door is exactly where I belong, because unlike you, I don't need the view to be seen." The crowd went wild, half in shock, half in thunderous applause. Julia Roberts turned sharply on her heel. Julia's sharp turn toward the exit sent a ripple through the studio, the kind of movement that shifts an entire crowd's energy in an instant. Her stride was steady, fierce, every step radiating defiance. The audience screamed louder, some rising from their seats, others clutching their mouths as if unable to believe they were watching one of Hollywood's biggest stars storm off live television. The cameramen scrambled to follow her, the red lights on their rigs blinking frantically, capturing every inch of her retreat. It was raw, unscripted television, gold, the kind of moment executives would both fear and celebrate. Joy Behar, left standing behind the desk, looked like a volcano, on the edge of eruption. Her voice cracked as she yelled across the stage. "That's right. Walk away. America's sweetheart can't handle a few tough questions." The jab was cruel, loud, and desperate, a last swing meant to draw blood. The crowd roared in response, some booing Joy, others egging her on. It was no longer a talk show audience. It was a split stadium, divided into Team Julia and Team Joy. Julia didn't stop. She reached the edge of the stage, her hand brushing the curtain, when she froze. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder, the glare in her eyes enough to stop hearts. The studio hushed, the anticipation almost unbearable. And then she delivered the line that would dominate every headline for the next week. "Sweetheart or not, Joy, at least I don't need to scream to stay relevant." The crowd detonated, their screams echoing through the rafters. Joy staggered back a step as if she'd been physically struck. The co-hosts sat paralyzed, their faces mirrors of disbelief. Sunny Hostin whispered under her breath, "Oh my God." Whoopi Goldberg buried her face in her hands, muttering, "We're gonna need prayer after this." Julia turned back toward the exit and began walking again, this time unstoppable, her presence larger than life. Every eye in the studio followed her, every camera zoomed in, capturing the sight of Julia Roberts leaving the battlefield like a conquering queen. The chant broke out again from the back rows. "Julia, Julia, Julia." It grew louder, fiercer, until it drowned out everything else. Joy, shaking with fury, shouted one last dagger across the stage. "Run, Julia. Run back to Hollywood where they still pretend you matter." But her words fell flat against the tidal wave of cheers crashing through the room. Julia didn't even look back. She disappeared behind the curtain, leaving only chaos, gasps, and a stunned silence hanging heavy over the set of The View. The curtain fell behind Julia Roberts with a heavy swoosh, and for a moment the studio felt like a battlefield after a war, smoke still in the air, echoes of explosions ringing in the ears of everyone left behind. The audience sat stunned, some still chanting her name, others booing, the sound colliding into a chaotic storm. Joy Behar, red-faced and trembling, stood frozen at the desk, her chest heaving as if she'd just gone 10 rounds in a boxing ring. For once, the queen of sharp-tongued retorts had no words ready, no smirk to lean on. Julia Roberts had walked off the View, and the fallout was instant. The co-host shifted uneasily. Sunny Hostin tried to smile at the camera, her voice soft and shaky. Well, that was unexpected. The audience laughed nervously, though the tension was too thick to cut. Sarah N. attempted to jump in. Let's take a quick break, but Joy snapped, her voice cutting through like a whip. No, we're not running from this. She wanted to storm out. Fine, let her, but don't think for a second Julia Roberts can waltz in here, insult me on my stage, and walk away a hero. The audience booed loudly, a wave of disapproval crashing over her. Joy's eyes flicked from side to side, fury and embarrassment written all over her face. She slammed her palm on the desk again. What, you think she's some kind of saint? She's Hollywood royalty. She's used to everyone bowing down to her. Well, not here, not on The View. But the boos didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder, some audience members standing to shout back at her. You went too far, Joy. One man bellowed, another woman shouted, Julia owned you. The live studio was spiraling out of control. Producers were in full meltdown mode, screaming into headsets, waving frantic signals to cut to commercial. The director hesitated, his instincts torn between protecting the show and capturing the most viral television moment of the decade. Cameras zoomed in tight on Joy, her face twisted with fury, sweat glistening under the hot lights. For once, she looked vulnerable, cornered, her own audience turning against her. Then Whoopi Goldberg, the only voice of reason left, leaned forward and said firmly, "All right, enough, we're going to break. Everyone calm down before this place explodes." And with that, the screen cut to black, an abrupt commercial break that did nothing to silence the storm brewing in the studio and across the internet. Because as Julia Roberts walked out, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok were already on fire. Clips of the showdown spread like wildfire, hashtags exploding, fans and critics alike choosing sides in the fiercest celebrity clash daytime television had ever seen. When the cameras returned from commercial, the View studio looked like a war. Struggling to rebuild, the audience was still buzzing, phones in the air as if they were at a rock concert, desperate to capture the chaos. Joy Behar sat stiffly at the desk, her expression a storm of fury and humiliation. The other co-hosts shifted uneasily, unsure of how to steer the show back on track. But the truth was clear, nothing would ever return to normal after what had just happened. Julia Roberts walking off in flames wasn't just a celebrity spat, it was a cultural earthquake. Joy cleared her throat, trying to reassert control. Well folks, if Julia Roberts thinks she can come in here, throw a tantrum, and make headlines, she's succeeded. Congratulations. The audience groaned, some booing, some clapping half-heartedly. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice biting, her eyes still blazing. But let me remind you, all this is The View. We've survived bigger egos than hers, and we'll keep doing what we do best, telling the truth. It was meant to sound defiant, but instead it came across brittle, defensive. The damage was already done. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, Julia Roberts was being swarmed by staff, security, and even a few stunned producers. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady, powerful. Let them spin it however they want, she said firmly. I said what needed to be said. Outside the studio, the chants of Julia could still be heard echoing from the audience, spilling into the hallways. She wasn't just walking off a talk show, she was walking into legend. By the time the credits rolled, the internet had already chosen sides. Twitter was ablaze with hashtag Team Julia and hashtag Team Joy trending worldwide. TikTok clips of the showdown hit 1 million views within minutes, dissecting every glare, every insult, every breathtaking exchange. Fans were calling it the greatest live TV moment since Kanye and Taylor, while others declared Joy Behar had finally met her match. Entertainment reporters scrambled to cover the story, tabloids plastering headlines across their sites. Julia Roberts walks out on The View. Joy Behar destroyed on live TV. America's sweetheart no more, she's a queen. The clash wasn't just news, it was history, etched into the annals of pop culture forever. And as Julia Roberts disappeared into the New York night, her departure left one undeniable truth blazing in the aftermath. Sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought on movie screens, but on live television, where reputations are shattered, legends are forged, and the world can't look away. This was more than a walkout. This was a reckoning, and if you don't want to miss the next explosive showdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now to HOA's Story Sphere, because the drama is only just beginning.